For those of you in the UK, the woman behind me needs no introduction. That, of course, is Lucy Letby. For those of you who are not in the UK and don't know much about her, she was accused and convicted of murdering, I think, 7 babies and attempted murder of one other baby who didn't die. But she's been back in the news lately, and there's been a lot of new narrative around her, a lot of people challenging her conviction. I think you remember when she was actually convicted maybe a year and a half ago now, or maybe even less than that. We heard about the story, it was very sensational, then it kind of disappeared, and we just stopped hearing about it. So that surprised me. And I did a piece on it a few months ago. I actually have to give myself credit. I was ahead of this story. Outscoops, The Guardian, The Telegraph, all of them talking about it now. I was ahead of that, but maybe that's because of some stuff I want to tell you about later on. That's why they weren't covering it. But essentially getting back to why she's in the news lately and the new narrative surrounding her. So first, I want to talk briefly about her conviction, the nature of that, what that meant, why I think, and most people that have logically looked at this case are pretty convinced that she's actually innocent. Even if she's not innocent, the evidence used to convict her was that's kind of evidence shouldn't be used to convict anybody, because that is a reason why we have processes, right? Even if someone is guilty of something, if you see someone on the street shoot someone else, there's still a process we have to go through to actually convince, a jury of their peers and all those kind of things. We can't just say, well, it's so obvious, let's just, doesn't matter what the evidence is. The process does matter. You wouldn't just not give them a defense lawyer, or if they can't afford a lawyer, you wouldn't not provide one for them because it's so heinous or it's so obvious. And so that's kind of why we're talking about this today. And so in the piece I published a few months ago, you can see the piece just here. Again, I'm not going to go through the entire thing because it's quite a long form piece. But I talked about two main reasons why I was pretty sure she was innocent. And I guess I should plug the New Yorker magazine at this point, because I got a lot of the evidence from their piece, and they wrote a piece about it, which again was actually banned in the UK. A lot of people don't know this. The first piece that really challenged a lot of the Lucy Letby evidence and the conviction was written in America. But because we have reporting restrictions on this case in the UK, it was banned, and so you couldn't talk about it. And so when I wrote my piece, I had to essentially use a VPN to access their piece and read through the evidence for myself. Also, when I wrote my piece, because I was scared about, a kind of court order against me because the police were actually doing that, I actually wrote a disclaimer at the start of my piece, which you can see here, where it talks about the fact that I'm just publishing this out of curiosity, as a private citizen, because again, there are press restrictions on the case, which again were very bizarre. I want to get into those, a little later on. Maybe I should actually get into it now. So maybe I think I'll do that now. Actually, let's get into the press restrictions in the case. So some prominent lawyers from a famous law firm, which I can't remember the name of now, they talked about the press restrictions in the case, and they actually talked about how unusual it was. So usually, obviously, when this case broke, you'd expect all the cameras to be there every day outside the courthouse, watching her go in, watching her come out, talking about what evidence was discussed today and tomorrow. But we didn't really get any of that. Once we heard about the event and what she was accused of, Angel of Death and all that kind of fancy nicknames, she just kind of disappeared from the news until we just heard that she was convicted, and we didn't really hear anything much more after that. There was a reason for that, because of some press restrictions that essentially banned the press from covering the case. Now, the interesting thing was, there's different laws for when the press can't cover a case. Usually, they relate to national security or things like that, D notices, which you might have heard about. But the law used to actually seek the court order preventing coverage of the case was actually a very bizarre one, because it was a law basically meant to protect juveniles and people that were under threat from like as witnesses. They were under threat from maybe the person being accused, like the defendant in the case. So if you imagine, like, if you're testifying against a mob boss or someone like that can actually harm you or your family, it will make sense for your identity not to be revealed, so that you can freely go in there and say the truth about what happened. So that was the kind of restriction they used in this case, which is odd for two reasons. Obviously, one, no one's really trying to go after the witnesses in this case, and secondly, there's no real threat or danger to them. That's kind of like the first example, actually. Apologies for that, but that's basically the main reason why no one's trying to go after these people. Their lives are not in danger. A lot of them are like medical experts and things like that. So why would you stop people from knowing about this to protect them from what? Secondly, the caveat, the interesting thing about this particular law is that it bans reporting on this for the entire lifetime of the witnesses. So even if one witness was like 21, they say they go by the youngest witness, I guess, because all of them have to be dead, but before you can report on it, you can't report on that case on that until that person dies, which could be they could die at 90. I mean, our healthcare system is not as great as it used to be, but who knows? That would mean for 70 years we can't talk about essentially one of the worst serial murder cases in the history of the country. Why would you seek such draconian restrictions on a case of significant public interest? Who knows? Again, I'll let the conspiratorial amongst you talk more about that. But that was essentially the reason why the case disappeared from the headlines. And so now it's back in the headlines. I'm a bit surprised because, to my knowledge, those restrictions have not been removed. So it's confusing that people can just freely go and talk about this. And for those of you wondering whether or not these restrictions are actually enforced, yes, they are. In fact, after the case, part of what I wrote about in my piece a few months ago, which you can again see on my website, if if you prefer reading to watching video, is that quite a few people tried to talk about the case afterwards. But the police went after people that were questioning the case, but those that were basically saying she's horrible, she's etc. etc. They left those up. In fact, the British Medical Journal, one of the preeminent, medical, journalistic enterprises in the world, they publish stuff on all kinds of things all the time. A professor published a piece in there basically saying some of this evidence I'm not too sure about. The police contacted them and told them to take it down. When I was doing my piece, I actually got a screenshot of the page where it says, this has been taken down by court order because the police said we can't have this. So again, it's very interesting, which is good, by the way. I'm happy that people are talking about it. We should be able to talk about it, but it's very odd and suspicious that they were going after people that were questioning anything about this case with such vigor. It didn't make any sense. So that's one thing. Get into the actual evidence. When I wrote my piece, what I considered and looked at, for me to be convinced that she was innocent. If you read the long form piece in the New Yorker, I don't think anyone can read that piece. I'm pretty sure people that are making tweets about it, complaining about Lucy Letby trutherism, and it's just because she's white and blonde. They're idiots. Okay, if you see anyone tweeting like that, just quote me. You're an idiot. You haven't read the case, right? Now, if you think about any type of murder case, attempted murder, let's just say murder, what's the first thing you would try and naturally say? How did they die? What's the cause of death? Like, if you're saying I killed someone, tell me how I killed them. Now, did you know that for 7 of the babies, I think 6 of them, maybe not 7, because one of them was insulin poisoning, which I want to get to, essentially for both of the cases, the cause of death was essentially never proven. Now, imagine yourself, I don't know, some of you might work in the medical profession. If you're being accused of something this serious, and you're like, okay, tell me how I killed them. And they're like, oh, we're not sure, but we just think you did it. What? No, this is ridiculous. Like, come on. Now, they finally eventually were able to kind of come up with something. That's basically what they did. They basically worked backwards because they couldn't find any logical way these babies could have died that she would have caused. So they came up with a theory. The theory they came up with was something called air embolism. That was a theory as to how she killed them. And air embolism basically goes like you let air into someone's lungs or their airways and they basically suffocate to death. Now, sounds, very cunning and smart, right? How would you prove that? How would you know she did it? The only problem with that is that it's not possible. Many experts have testified that it's not even sure that this can kill someone. There's never been a recorded death by this method in history. So you're charging someone again in the most grave, I don't know, serial killer case in the history of this country, and the cause of death cannot even be established. This is a massive boulder in the case. It's a huge problem. Not only that, the person that came up with this theory, this cause of death, was a consultant called Dewey Evans. Look at what a judge said about him in a previous case. She basically said this guy is useless. Like, he makes assertions that are beyond his professional competence. And basically, he makes shit up. That's what they've said about this guy. This is the guy that came up with the cause of death theory that was used to convict her. Again, if you were in this case, God forbid, and people were charging you and you're bringing experts like this, you'd probably be sitting there thinking, I can't believe this. Like, what the fuck? This is so bogus. Like, this is nonsense. So those two things already don't make sense. The fact that the prosecution witness, the star witness, was basically in a previous case not too long before this one, was already slammed by the judge for basically talking shit. The evidence he brought for how the babies died, what a classic example of him talking shit, because it's never been proven for that method of death to kill anyone. Like, this makes no sense. And the third one was that one of the cases she was found guilty, and they claimed that she killed the baby through poisoning them with insulin. But again, not only did the experts testify that that is extremely difficult to prove, but secondly, the baby actually survived. And get this, she wasn't even working that shift when the baby died. What is going on? Like, what is happening here? Like, this is so nonsense. Like I said, anyone, quote me. And I always get these things right because, as you can see on my page, I stay ahead of all these stories. If there's anyone telling you out there that they're convinced of the guilt of this woman, just ask them, how did the babies die? I promise you they don't know. Because if they told you, then you have to explain to them, how does that cause of death work? And then they'll have to tell you that it doesn't work because there's no medical journal that has concluded that that method of trying to kill someone is actually possible. How can I physically try and kill someone in a way that's not possible? And then you charge me for killing them based on that same method. People that are talking about this case very boldly on social media, they haven't read it. They're just talking out their ass. Quote me. So those are the two reasons why essentially I'm summarizing the article I wrote. Why there's other statistical evidence. I don't even want to get to and bore you with the details and the numbers. Like the way they basically concluded she killed them was like essentially the evidence was like, you were there, babies died, therefore you were responsible for killing the babies. Again, anyone that understands a lick of maths, you don't even have to understand maths to know that obviously you can't pick evidence this way. Just because someone's there and something happened, correlation doesn't equal causation. Like this is a very basic thing that anyone with any fundamental level of, mathematical or statistical understanding, or even just logic knows. Like it makes no sense. But that's basically the biggest evidence they have against her. They did some phony maths to prove that she was there was more babies dying when she was working, therefore babies died. The maths was completely junk, as many experts like statistical professors have come up and said, like, this maths makes no sense. So that's another thing, but that's enough of the reason why, she may or may not have done it or whatever. That's still going on. But what I wanted to talk about more specifically today, he says, after spending 5 minutes talking about something else, is the takes people are having about the case right now. So there's been a lot of tweets like the ones behind me, challenging the fact that she's innocent. But as you can see by these tweets, these people are not even doing it to say like, oh, there's this smoking gun that proves that she's guilty. They're making a point that people are only claiming she's guilty because she's white and blonde and is kind of pretty. Now, I'm not going to talk about the last point about whether she's pretty. I'll let you guys, that's your opinion, right? But this logic makes no sense because even if there is a racial angle here, they're looking at it the totally opposite way. Again, I've made videos a lot about in the past few weeks about principles. Yeah, we have a principle in most free societies that people should be judged fairly based on evidence by a jury of their peers, all that kind of stuff. If someone is not being judged by that standard, the logic is not like, oh, that's fair because they do that kind of stuff to other people that are in less privileged positions. The logic should be we should try and judge everyone like that because that will lead to the best outcomes for anyone, regardless of racial, difference. So making a statement like, oh, she's only getting the benefit of the doubt because she's white. If this was a black woman, they would throw her under the jail. Yeah, this is why you should defend her, because now you can apply this same principle when a black woman or a black man is being treated unfairly by the justice system. If you defend someone being treated unfairly and bogus evidence being used against them to convict them, how can you then come and say, oh, when a black person is being subject to the same treatment, oh, actually this is unfair because they're black? Well, you wanted that principle for someone else. Why would they not apply the principle to the people you want to protect or the people you like? Doesn't it just make sense to have consistent principles which you've established for hundreds of years since the Magna Carta, which is that the evidence should be pretty conclusive, and if there's not conclusive evidence, you shouldn't convict. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, to quote Johnny Cochran. And although I keep stressing that again, these people clearly have not read the case. They've just got the racial angle completely wrong. Because what we don't want is a system that, even if she is guilty, the kind of evidence used to convict her is so bad. Like no one, like I said, no one, even the most heinous of serial murderers, should not be convicted under this quality of evidence. If their guilt is so obvious, it should be very easy to find the evidence to convict them then. And since then, we've now had, a story that came out a few days ago talking about how one of the hospitals where she had placement, they're going to look into her records because there was a 40% increase in babies' tubes being dislodged when she was working. Everyone knows they're just trying to cover their backs. Lucy Letby was a woman that was arrested twice, investigated for multiple years, and eventually all they could come up with was a cause of death that doesn't even physically, or is not even physiologically possible. Why couldn't they find this evidence of this extra 40%, when they were investigating it for multiple years? If you're investigating someone for doing something that you think or fear that may have been going on for a very long time, wouldn't you look back into their past and try and see when did they start this kind of behavior? I mean, serial killers, when you talk about, we see a pattern. Sometimes you see the kids, harming animals and all that kind of stuff. Then you go back and make that connection. Why is it that after she's been convicted a year later, when there's been renewed interest into how bogus the evidence is, do you now find this new piece of evidence? Again, that makes no fucking sense. Use your brains. People are not thinking logically about this. And it's very, very confusing. It reminds me a bit of the Kyle Rittenhouse kind of case where it was actually a clear case of self-defense. But everyone kept on making a point that, oh, if he was black, they would have arrested him, blah, blah. Okay, that's the reason why you should defend this one. So you can use this principle for when a black person does it. Not saying they should subject them to the same unfair treatment that a black person may or may not get, because now you want to apply the unfair standard equally. No, apply the fair standard equally so everyone can have a fair hearing. So like I said, whether or not she did it, I'm pretty convinced that she didn't do it. But whether or not she did it, the evidence used to convict her is so bad that even the people that just want to prove so bad that she did it, they should be like, well, if it's so obvious, let's actually find the evidence to convict her properly and not just be making assumptions about, what the evidence is or trying to believe it based on the fact that if it was a black person, they wouldn't have given them this amount of leeway because she didn't do it. I think on that note, I'll wrap up for today. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. Do you think she did it? Do you think she didn't do it? If you think she did it, read my article, yeah? Or just watch this video. If you've watched this video for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, and you still think she did it, then clearly you're being a truther right now because I presented you evidence. You're not listening to the evidence. Now you're the one being biased against her for some reason that you can't explain. If there's something about your sensitivities that make you want to believe in something with no evidence, you need to look inwards, not outwards. The problem is not with society. I think it's with you. So ask yourself the question, why do you want her to have done it so badly? What's your stake in whether or not she did it or didn't do it? People are making points about this is so unfair to the families for it to be dragged out and for it to be. No, it's not unfair to the families at all. If the families were failed by a terrible hospital and a terrible system, which the hospital was extremely bad, they deserve to know that. What they don't deserve is for them to be told a sensational story about, a child murderer with no motive, no means of killing someone, no rationale, no logic, and this is the explanation they're giving for why they lost their premature baby. That really is the real insult to them. Let the truth come out about how bad the system was and how now we've made changes and we're not going to do that again. Let them know the truth. So it's not unfair to the families. What's unfair to the families is lying to them, and all the people trying to feign about why it's unfair. So even if it's unfair to the families, why should someone lose the rest of their lives because it's unfair to the families to dig up and actually find out what the truth is? If you were in that situation, is that what you'd be saying? Well, I know I'm innocent, but for the families to not go through anything horrible, let me just accept my fate and just rot in prison for the rest of my life so the families can have peace. No. I don't care. Like, respectfully to them, like, that's their business. I need to prove my innocence and come out so we can really expose who the real culprits are in this case. And I think if there's ever a kind of inquiry or a serious inquest, these things that I'm saying is very easily accessible now because there's no there's no court orders blocking people accessing this kind of information. Do your research, as they say. There's no evidence. If there's evidence for her doing it, everyone will just hold their hand up and be like, okay, cool. No one cares like about her, whether or not she's white, black. Or people are saying that just like they're being idiotic. I'll be honest. It's not about that. It's about the fact that the evidence was horrible, and all the people saying, yeah, she did it, she did it, she did it. They have no evidence. Just tell us why you believe she did it. Just tell us the evidence. Tell us how she killed them. They can't tell you because they haven't read the case. Because if you read the case, anyone that's read the case seriously knows like this is ridiculous. That's why she was arrested twice, and they had to let her go because they couldn't find anything against her until this dodgy, consultant expert witness came in and came up with a theory of a cause of death that had never been proven, and this was accepted. What is this? Anyway, I'm getting into a bit of a rant now, so I'll leave it there. Let me know what your thoughts are, and if you want to talk about it further, as you can see, I'm clearly very passionate. I'm enjoying talking about this, so do reach out to me privately, whatever you want to do. Comment on the on the video, and we can continue that. So thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you guys on the next update of What's in the World. Bye.